Folks, the British were focused on who up to this point? Bunker Hill, Lexington and Concord. Attack. The farthest south we go is really to Philadelphia. Trenton, Princeton, New York, that's as far. With the French entering the war, so this would be the year 1778. Is everybody okay with that? If you want, write 1778 at the top here. England is going to make a philosophical change. Instead of going after the strength of your enemy, instead of taking your enemy on head on, England is going to go after the weakness of your enemy. England believes, remember the good mercantile colonies, Carolina, Virginia. England believes that these colonies have more Tories. These colonies kind of joined the war like, yeah, okay, revolution, good, yeah, we'll do it. And they didn't believe in it. What you might want to point out is if you want to be more proper, the words you could put out here or on the top would be a war of attrition. Folks, what that means is slow, deliberate. Instead of just going up to your opponent, hitting them once, winning the war, and going home, when the British move to the south, they are beginning to plan on a more prolonged war, a slower war. They are going to go after the weakness of their enemy, and they are slowly going to work their way north. As they begin, in their mind, to pacify southern colonies, that will slowly weaken Massachusetts, and instead of focusing on Massachusetts first, we will say Massachusetts for last. And what is crazy is that is very similar to what we will eventually do to beat the Confederacy in the Civil War, and that is very similar to what eventually we do to beat Adolf Hitler in World War II. Instead of trying to take them on head on, go after their strength, you slowly go around, weaken, 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 until you can win. Has everybody got this? And this makes sense because Savannah is where? So you notice they start at the south. That was not a very heavily populated. Because there's not a large population, the British arrive. This again, if you look, is technically Clinton. The British arrive, and you know what the crazy thing is even in Georgia, the British stay there for almost a year. That would be called pacification. The British go to little towns, they put up British flags, the people appear to be loyal to England, and after England believes Georgia is pacified, they then move. Charleston is, does everybody see what they're doing? They're just moving their way north. Originally, they were spending about 1 year at a time, okay? Ladies and gentlemen, you do need to make at least a note about Charleston. At Charleston, the Southern Army of the United States, led by Benjamin Lincoln, will be captured. In technical terms, this is the largest defeat. This is the largest victory of the British. This is our largest loss. Bless you. The Battle of Charleston does seem to support the British strategy is working. It appears, and notice, we are going through these a little bit faster. If you understand the flow, you should be okay. Remember, what is the purpose? We are going to apply the weak south and move our way up. What I'm writing on the board, honestly, is what makes the movie The Patriot make sense. If you've ever watched the movie The Patriot, it really isn't about this stuff. In the movie The Patriot, the South had been defeated, correct? And in the movie The Patriot, the Mel Gibson character basically becomes a guerrilla fighter. He began to attack the supply lines. He began to harass the British. Ladies and gentlemen, after the big cities surrendered, people like Francis Marion continued to pester the British. They continued to irritate the British. They simply didn't have enough men to have more of an organized combat. Does everybody understand that? The next one, Camden, and folks, I'm going to be very honest. You're going to notice the war in the South, the general pattern is the British are more successful, and it does appear that it's working. At Camden, what is the big item? Horatio. And if you want to know, where did he come from? Saratoga. Folks, the biggest thing I want to point out is where was the controversy? Battle of Camden is going to be the ultimate proof. Because of Saratoga, the Congress, Horatio Gates, he is selected very much like they picked George Washington, and Horatio Gates is sent to the South. George Washington is still in Philadelphia. Gates is picked by Congress. He is supposed to defend the South. The Battle of Camden, or excuse me, the Battle of Camden is an absolute debacle. Horatio Gates goes running down there. He runs into battle. His army is completely annihilated. According to reports, Gates himself ran from the battlefield. The army was ill-prepared. The army was badly beaten. These two battles together really begin to make England believe their strategy is working, and the Americans in the South do not care. It is this battle that convinces Benedict Arnold that the Congress made a mistake. Look how bad he did. Make no mistake, the Battle of Camden is a debacle. Kings Mountain. In fact, Kings Mountain and Cowpens go together. Notice, Morgan is a star. What is happening at this point? Oh, just so you know, the English were so pleased with Clinton. The war has been going on a while that General Howe is being brought back to England. He is being brought home. Technically, the reason I go like this is Clinton is moved up to New York, the bigger army, and that's when Cornwallis takes over. So just so you technically understand, the reason this happens, he doesn't die or anything, he is actually promoted. The Army of the Potomac, or the Army of New York, was the main British army. After the large cities, the British would then go into small towns, literally towns like Elkhorn, towns like Waukesha, and try to pacify to bring us to these two battles. The British are trying to finish off South Carolina, and they are trying to move to North Carolina. If you are wanting to be more technical, more accurate, this would actually be October 7th. And folks, do I care about the date? This would just give you an idea of where we are, and it would be 1780. So if you're looking at the dates, Kings Mountain, and why? Folks, Kings Mountain is an absolutely insignificant town. What happens? A British army is going to run into Daniel Morgan. Daniel Morgan is a very unique army. Daniel Morgan is a group of men from the frontier. They are special. Daniel Morgan, who has a group of frontiersmen, you know, Kentuckians, Tennesseans, they completely have rifles. The Battle of Kings Mountain begins to see a military transition. In the Battle of Kings Mountain, rifles. Remember, muskets are the smoothbore, rifles. I mean, folks, these are frontier fur traders and trappers. And if you want to be more accurate, not only do they have rifles, they all know how to use them. In the Battle of Kings Mountain, this is really an example of technology in the future. This, that's the star, is the first victory of the Americans in the South. Daniel Morgan successfully fights off, beats off the British Army, and the reason is the British could not figure out how to deal with his rifles. The American army fight at a bigger distance. The American army, you know, standing line, you're shoulder to shoulder, right? Morgan's men would be spread out. Their men would literally be 8-9 feet apart. His army would also be kind of in these layers, which normally you're supposed to be in one solid line, right? The idea was, as the British march forward, when a colonist shoots, what are they trying to do every time they shoot their gun? Kill something. You aim. You literally aim. For those of you who know, in the British, when they say fire, British soldiers were taught to turn away. Because what does the gun do when they fire? They have flashback. Is the gun accurate where it matters what you're pointing at? Now think, remember how I said the Morgans were staggered? As the British get close to one group of men, like let's say the first column, what is that group going to do? They're going to retreat. And if the group retreats, what are the other two columns still doing? And that's where the British have trouble. The problem is, the Battle of Kings Mountain begins to show that if used effectively, rifles completely outclass the musket. You can fire, you can attack from a greater distance, and you can now begin to change your strategy. You don't need to line up shoulder to shoulder. Think about it. If Morgan's men are spread out, and the British are lined up shoulder to shoulder, you don't even have to be the greatest shot in the world. You just aim in the center of the red, right? Morgan does it twice. Okay? Next battle, Gulliver's Courthouse. So folks, Kings Mountain and Cowpens are both American victories. In technical terms, they are identical. I would spend more time in Kings Mountain because it's the first one. Morgan beats the British twice. That pisses off Cornwallis. He looks at this as a problem. Cornwallis sends an army, that would be this battle, to destroy Morgan. This time, Nathaniel Greene, the replacement for Gates, arrives. Greene and Morgan come together. So the American army has a standing army that is going to be joined by the riflemen. The Battle of Gulliver's Courthouse is a draw. They stop or I will go. The Battle of Gulliver's Courthouse is a draw. Ladies and gentlemen, a draw means no one wins. Both armies, the British and the Americans, fought very, very well. The British will claim victory because they actually capture the battlefield. At the end of the day, the American army, which was smaller, the American army, which like usual had supply issues, they retreat. Please be aware, Gulliver's Courthouse was not a located target. It was not a significant place. It was literally where the armies run into each other. Folks, when you look at Gulliver's Courthouse, what should be the indication? The American army is beginning to organize. The Battle of Gulliver's Courthouse, at the very least, the British won the field, but they lost a lot more men. The American army, especially with Morgan's rifles, was becoming a problem. The problem is the British basically claiming a victory. Gulliver's Courthouse was in North Carolina, and that is what convinces them to move to Yorktown. Cornwallis was beginning to get in a hurry. He wanted to show progress. The Battle of Gulliver's Courthouse should have been an indication that the British needed to slow down. The British, in fact, accelerated. That is going to be a mistake. Nathaniel Greene, he is the replacement for Gates. Nathaniel Greene does a great job. Once again, what is the problem? It's not Benedict Arnold. Remember, this was picked because of the Battle of Saratoga. Nathaniel Greene was picked because what does Congress do? They don't want to blame themselves. They don't want to admit that Benedict Arnold maybe was the man at Saratoga. So what did Congress argue? The reason Gates lost is he was a northerner. He did not understand the terrain. He did not understand the people. So they picked the southerner. I want to be fair. Nathaniel Greene does a beautiful job. He was a very competent man. Benedict Arnold is getting pissed. And really, that's it. For those who don't know, it is shortly after this moment, Benedict Arnold will be contacted by the British. He makes a deal where he agrees to surrender West Point. You know, today the military academy, West Point is on the Hudson River, kind of coming up from New York. Benedict Arnold agreed to surrender West Point. The British made him a promise that he would then be commissioned in the British Army, and literally, Benedict Arnold would switch uniforms. He would go from being an American to a Brit. Somehow or another, in fact, for years, I used to tease kids, if you ever drop a note, I will read it in class. What happened is Benedict Arnold, some of the letters he had will be found. The U.S. Army is sent to arrest him. Benedict Arnold does turn himself into the British. He does not surrender West Point. What happens to Benedict Arnold? The British never trust him and the Americans hate him. So please understand, the reason we mentioned him is it's kind of that, for Americans, that story of being a traitor, a turncoat. Make no mistake, I understand you people use four-letter swear words. They're dumb and stupid. At this time in history, if you wanted to get into a fight with someone, you called them a Benedict Arnold. Flat out. 100 years, the top #1 insult, if you were a guy and you wanted to kind of throw down, you would, because a Benedict Arnold means you have no morals, you are unethical, you will betray everything you love. Ladies and gentlemen, at that point we get to Yorktown. This is the final. Notice there is a date, October 19, 1781. There is no doubt I am trying to go faster in the South. That should be, that yes, there is some importance. Yes, I would be familiar, but I would look at it in this light. You know, have more of an understanding of the region versus as important. What do you want to notice at the Battle of Yorktown? Yorktown is really going to be this most unbelievably lucky battle. There are 3 Allied armies. Virginia militia, George Washington's Continentals, and Rochambeau is the French have arrived. Is everybody okay with that? Yorktown is where, here is the Chesapeake, Here is the James River. There's a peninsula right here in Virginia. The James River goes up here in the Chesapeake. On this Richmond, that is where Yorktown. Yorktown is a fortress that is on the peninsula. The British picked it because it was a peninsula, because it is surrounded. Up until this point in the war, the British Navy has never, ever been challenged in the war, because the Americans don't have one. If you want to just write something off to the side, this was an AP exam a few years ago. It is pretty nitpicky. Probably the most famous. In fact, most people look at this as the start of the American Navy. During the Revolution, we took regular ships, we put cannons on them, and we primarily went after British trade ships. John Paul Jones was the beginning of the American Navy. He is the one who had that quote, allegedly, "I have not yet begun to fight." You know, and again, but primarily, the U.S. did not have the firepower to go after the British warships. We would go after their trade ships or cargo ships. Does everybody understand that there's three armies? Folks, what normally I would spend my time on here is there are shadows. The most important one is in Yorktown is Cornwallis. Clinton Howe. Folks, this would be because there's actually two Howes, there's brothers. The one Howe that's here is basically watching Rochambeau. Clinton watches Washington. And if we were going to break this down, ladies and gentlemen, in every location, the British have the bigger army. The British have enough supplies, enough resources, that they have the ability to outman the Americans and the French. Militarily, these are called shadows. If Washington marches, Clinton follows. If Rochambeau moves, Howe follows. Does that make sense? Folks, what happens at the Battle of Yorktown is George Washington is told that a second French Navy is coming. It is led by a man named de Grasse. The key, absolutely critically important item is it is a new Navy. This Navy has not arrived yet. And as your brain is working and you are thinking, the key item of de Grasse is the British have not accounted for them yet. The British have not planned on it yet. If you're looking at size, it's like 20 warships, around 12,000 men. I mean, these are fairly good-sized French armies or navies, whichever you want to say. Folks, I'm not going to get too much. Don't worry about the numbers. The French are basically coming up from the south. George Washington is asked, where do you want them? Because clearly what is going to happen? Wherever they go, the English will simply readjust their men because they have the enormous army in New York. Washington decides that the best place would be Yorktown. The problem is Cornwallis already has a navy here. If you add de Grasse and Wayne, the two armies are almost equal. Is that really going to be our advantage? This is what happens at Yorktown. George Washington, right about this time, so probably starting in August or September, George Washington will once again use, remember his little campfire thing? George Washington left a group of his men in New York, in Philadelphia, and every day they would move the camp. There was like 1,000 men. Washington took the rest of his army and he quietly marched to Virginia. The purpose of the decoy is so that General Clinton doesn't do what? He doesn't follow. See Rochambeau? He is trapped by the British Navy. Once again, you get absolute dumb luck or skill. It just so happens, for those of you who don't know, I realize we live in Wisconsin, this time of year is hurricane season. And it just so happened in that particular year that a large tropical storm was coming. In the middle of the storm, Rochambeau broke to the ocean. During the storm, the British, of course, they couldn't pursue. By the time the storm was over, the British, did they go up to Canada? Where did they go? And of course, the reality was, everybody descended on Yorktown. And if we get to this, what would be kind of the key item? Folks, by luck and skill, that is roughly the size of the army that appears at Yorktown. 57 Americans, that's Washington. 3,100 militiamen, that would be Wayne. And almost 17,000 French, many of them, of course, are running the ships. Not only do they have this enormous group, if you add it together, they also had a navy of over 31 warships. Cornwallis had 19. Yorktown is a peninsula. Ladies and gentlemen, the single most important thing at the Battle of Yorktown is the French Navy is able to overpower the British. The British Navy is outnumbered 2-1, and the British Navy is forced to pull back. Once the British Navy pulls back, what is Cornwallis's problem? He's trapped on a peninsula. The American and French army basically cut off the peninsula. The French Navy basically surrounds the peninsula. For several days, Cornwallis hopes that Clinton and Howe appear. When they don't, on October 19th, Cornwallis tries to break free. He tries to simply, remember Burgoyne, he tries to simply smash and run. The lines hold. Cornwallis fails to escape. And on October 19th, 1781, Lord Cornwallis surrenders. For all military purposes, that is the end of the American. Ladies and gentlemen, when Lord Cornwallis surrenders, there are no more major battles. For the most part, this is when England is defeated. Technically, we do not have a peace agreement. Technically, there was still a state of war. The British still occupied New York. But if you are the people in Virginia or Carolina or even Massachusetts, October 1971 is really when the war stops. The one exception is if you lived in New York, because the British were still there. The next item will be the Treaty of Paris. Folks, the Treaty of Paris is the agreement to end the war. John Adams had been in Paris through most of the war. No, I said that wrong. Is the Treaty of Paris negotiating with the English for most of the war? He had not been successful. After the Battle of Yorktown, we sent a group, and the group included Adams, John Jay, Benjamin Franklin, Lawrence, and Jefferson. Notice, these are names you should recognize, at least all but Lawrence. Adams, future president. John Jay, the first Chief Justice. Benjamin Franklin, the most well-known man in America. Ralph Lawrence, his grandfather, invents a clothing line. I'm making that up. And Thomas Jefferson, the third president. What is the reason? Oh, the Treaty of Paris, I already had it here, is not made until 1783. Notice, 1781, 1783. In the Treaty of Alliance, it actually indicates that America and France would negotiate together. After the Battle of Yorktown, they fought in the ocean, they fought up around Canada, they fought in Europe, and America just kind of sat there and waited. Eventually, America began to realize that we did not have the same issues as the French, and we actually break kind of some of the parts of the treaty. The Treaty of Paris will be a separate deal between America and England. We make our own peace, and the French will make their own peace. So the Treaty of Paris is America's agreement with England. It basically grants America independence. America will get 13 colonies, plus the Ohio and Mississippi Valley. If you want to say that easily in your head, America owns everything from the ocean to the Mississippi River. Basically that would be the simplest and fastest. We still do not have Florida, right? Who does? Spain. Okay. 2, the British promised to leave. Remember, the British are still in what 2 places? 2. And the proclamation ports. The British promised that they will leave. 3, America promised to treat Tories fairly. If you want, you can, number 2 and 3, we lied, they lied. We are not real nice to Tories, and they do not leave the frontier forts. They will leave New York, but they will not leave the frontier forts. In fact, that will be a problem for later. Item that every year I think people get mixed up, the war. Just like the French Indian War is expensive, the number one way we paid for the war was paper money. Literally, and this is relatively common, in the war we literally printed up money that said U.S. American money. After the war, we have to figure out how do we pay for that? What was it? Literally, it was just paper crap. So that's how we paid for it. Just so you know, the period of time, like right when the war ends, the first American government is often referred to as the experimental period. That would be the government under the Articles of Confederation, which technically is 1777 to 1789. Yes, so it technically begins in the war. This is the item that we will probably spend a little time with. The document that created the first American government is the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation was America's first constitutional government. What is the biggest problem with it? We wrote this in the middle of the war. We had to come up with a document that all the states would agree to, because if you lose the war, nothing matters. We are going to find out that the Articles of Confederation has several major problems. That is why today, what did we do with the Articles? We threw it out and replaced it with, you need to know that. Oh, the Articles of Confederation, and again, and these are things on the test, because remember, the Articles is created during the war. The Articles replaced the Second Congress. Everybody make sense with that? Because at this point, instead of calling it the Second Congress, it would be the United States Congress. The Articles is nicknamed the League of Friendship, because just like, remember the Albany Plan? That's under the Articles of Confederation, and I realize this sounds dumb, the Articles does not create one united government. It creates 13 independent countries that when they come together, they are the United States. I know that sounds weird. The best example I can give you is the old Power Rangers. Remember when they would morph together to become the big robot? But they only do it if they all come together, right? Under the Articles, each colony is really a separate country. I mean, that's really what the Confederation means. And when they work together, that's the United States. One weird thing about the Articles, it is written in 1777, which is kind of right around Saratoga, right? It'll exist until that's when we make the Constitution. Technically, the Articles was not official until 1781. Maryland refused to ratify it. For, what is that, 4 years, Maryland absolutely refused. And if you look, the big controversy was this crap. Remember the Ohio Valley and the Mississippi Valley? Maryland was absolutely adamant, wait a second, what's going to happen with that land? Who gets it? And the problem was Virginia and Massachusetts and the Carolinas often claim that their charters extended out. And if you were Maryland, where you're landlocked, or if you were Rhode Island, which you are that big, that could be a huge problem. Because Virginia could literally become 4 times bigger than everybody else. Eventually, that will be solved with this. So what we need to understand is Maryland is very concerned what is going to happen with the Western land, because up to this point, Virginia is arguing it's ours. We get it all, or most of it. And Maryland felt that was a bunch of crap. Eventually, Virginia agrees to compromise. They give the land to Congress, and Congress will decide what happens to it. Land Act. The Land Act, in the most simple terms, it takes the Ohio Valley, it surveys and divides it. That's it. Ladies and gentlemen, the Land Act, by order of the Congress, surveys. And again, what is the purpose? Why do we need a survey of the land? The purpose of surveying is so people can move and buy land. Folks, these surveys are so that people can go to the frontier, and literally there will be stakes of land that say like section 107, that's mine. The purpose of the survey was to now open up Ohio so people could claim, buy, and get the land. The land of Ohio doesn't do any good without people. The Land Act is to basically divide up the land. The idea of dividing it into colonies or territories, that comes later. This is simply dividing it for sale. Now, because all of you guys are already getting ahead of me, the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 creates, so first you do this, right? You divide it and we encourage people to move. The Northwest Ordinance deals with, well, what happens? What kind of government will be there? The Northwest Ordinance is going to create the policy of how do we make states? The Northwest Ordinance said that there could be between 5 to 7. We don't want one big, huge Ohio, and we don't want a little bunch of dinky Rhode Islands. Eventually, there will be 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin. That is the Ohio Valley. So when we talk about the Northwest Ordinance, Wisconsin is one of the 5 states. Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin. What the Northwest Ordinance says is once you get 5,000 people, you create a border. the border. You then can be classified a territory. As a territory, you can now send non-voting members to Congress. You are still under Congress's control. The Congress protects you. Folks, a territory is basically the stepping stone to becoming a state. This same pattern will follow for all of these, with the exception of, to some degree, California, which is going to become a royalty. If you want to be a state, you need 60,000. Constitution. Folks, the other big item with the Northwest Ordinance, it is the first time we begin to see this. After the Revolution, you begin to see a major decline in slavery. It goes against all men are created equal. So folks, what you want to write down is no slavery. The Northwest Ordinance put a ban of slavery in the territory.